In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
You might remember Memphian coach Bill Courtney from the Oscar-winning documentary Undefeated. Now, he's got an awesome movement and podcast called An Army of Normal Folks that you can check out at normalfolks.us.
I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today we are talking with Adeze Wilford, who recently joined the Brooks Art Museum as the Curator of African American Art and Art of the African Diaspora. So stay with us for a conversation with Adeze, and a special thanks to our sponsor, Youth Villages. Adeze, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And welcome to Memphis.
Thank you.
It's been, you took the job, I think it was announced in December, and have since moved here. We'll talk about that, but welcome. Talk about the job.
Great. So it is a really exciting moment in the Brooks' history. As you know, we're moving downtown, and there's a wonderful site-specific building that's being constructed. I walk past it almost every weekend when I go to the Cossett Library.
Yeah.
And so I was really excited about this opportunity of this new building project that involved a rehang of the collection and an understanding of how we can talk about artwork in meaningful ways to a community. And that was really exciting to me. But you're base camped out of the existing museum. Yes, we're here for some time.
For some time. I always try to do that.
There are exhibitions that are forthcoming. We just opened the Scholastic art exhibition, which is by youth. Some really incredible work. I was really impressed.
I've been to that before, not when my kids were doing that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was really just pleasantly surprised. It was really amazing stuff.
Yeah. And to be so young and to be so talented and have a point of view. So it's exciting to see that. We'll have a Kalito Rowell show that's coming to us from Pam in Miami. And then there's a couple other things that are in the works while we prepare for going downtown. You came from North Miami was your last position. Yes.
Is that right? What was the museum that was there?
MoCA, so the Museum of Contemporary Art, North Miami.
Okay. Doing the similar sort of art?
Yeah, so I was the curator there, and I was working with the exhibition department, and it is one of the oldest contemporary art spaces in the Miami area, and it was going through a period of transition and new leadership. So I was excited to be a part of the team doing that work and to really highlight what local artists in Miami were doing while also doing shows that brought people from all over the world.
Yeah. And is that the same goals for the Brooks, I assume?
Yes.
Yeah.
But this position is a little bit different because the focus is on art of the African diaspora and African American art, which is my area of focus, and a lot of my scholarship has been in that region of the world, but it's nice to kind of solely focus on that and to have the time to really do some deep research and to think.
And this will not, I should do it as a question. I assume it's a mix. You'll be working on the art that the Brooks owns, traveling exhibits, maybe putting Brooks art into exhibits that go elsewhere.
Yes.
I mean, talk about, like, for people not as close to this as you are, and I'm semi-close to it. What all that means in terms of how collections and exhibit and research and what people will see.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when visitors come into a museum, they see the exhibitions and they don't necessarily always know how much logistics goes into bringing something into a space. And so there are shipping things that you have to think about. You have to think about running feed and all of these exciting granular things that make up a big show. And so I'm doing a lot of work with our collection right now, just familiarizing myself because it's a encyclopedic museum, which is it's the first encyclopedic institution I've worked in. I've been in a lot of modern and contemporary spaces. So it's nice to spend time getting to know works that are, centuries old.
Yeah. Encyclopedic. What does that mean in your world?
To me, and I don't dictionary define it.
No. Yeah, there's no test at the end.
To me, it means art that spans from the very first known creation all the way up to artwork that you pull out of an artist's studio yesterday.
Gotcha.
And so it runs the gamut of all of the different types of art production that exist in our world.
Yeah. We talked a bunch about the logistics of traveling collections and stuff with Kevin Sharp from the Dixon.
Oh, nice.
In the lab, I think it was probably a month ago, and got really in the weeds about it. But it's really fascinating, the amount of work, time, effort, the pre-planning, can be, I mean, one of the exhibits they just had on, and I don't think this is atypical, was 4 or 5 years in advance planning for this to come. And then he had another one that had come together in less than a year, which was shocking, shockingly quick. And again, people don't know that when they come in, everything that goes into it.
Yeah, I had done a fellowship between Studio Museum and MoMA in New York. And one of the jokes at MoMA was the number of months that your show will be on view is the number of years that you will have worked to prepare for it, which is, in some regards, that's a pretty daunting thing to spend that much time thinking about one really specific moment. But then there's also the luxury of time where you get to really know and become an expert on that type of work.
Yeah.
It's exciting. But then I've done shows where I've had 18 months to 24 months to work on it. And then I've also done things where we had 3 months from start to finish, and even like a commission of new work. And so that can be, it's nice to have the flexibility to be nimble and to think about things that are of the moment. And then it's nice to, be leisurely and grow with an artist and grow with their ideas.
Yeah. The other thing that, and I don't know what the percentage is for the Brooks, but for all museums, really only a relatively small percentage of the full collection is on display at any given time. It's one of the motivating factors for the Brooks to move was we can put more art and we can optimize the space. And there are all kinds of things. But one was clearly just to be able to put more art on the walls and more frequently and have people see it. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially coming to an institution that there's an acquisition plan in place, you don't want to buy things and then have them languish in storage, never to be seen by the public. That's the whole point of a museum, is to be the repository for history. It's to be a space where the public can see things that, people who have these fabulous collections. In Miami, there were a lot of collectors that did, in fact, create spaces that specifically were for people to see what they had in their holdings, but that's not the typical way of things. And so it's important to be this kind of egalitarian space for art. And the more you can have on view, the more exciting. And it's nice to be able to switch things out over time as well and have different conversations.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Different conversations, different perspectives. What about, and I think you mentioned this, you've done this in Miami, current working artists in Memphis. I mean, what sort of relationships and displays and so on, exhibits might happen on that front?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is my week 4, so I haven't been.
So I know, come on, give me your whole plan. I want bullet points and PowerPoint right now.
Yeah, I'm working on that. But I haven't done any formal studio visits yet. I have a list of people that I am hoping to get into their studios and see. I've been asking my colleagues, which is really nice to have like a team that's super collegial.
Yeah.
I've been asking them about artists that they think that I should step into their studios. And so I'm planning on doing things. And also, like, when you move somewhere, it's different than if you're just in town for a quick visit and you feel like you have to hit the ground running and do everything in one day. I live here now, and I want to take my time and get to know people. I want to have one studio visit another one, and then, move forward. But there is a plan to have, Memphis as a highlighted site-specific place in the story that we're telling when we open the new building, but also having artists that have been either a part of the region's story and legacy, or are from here, have gone elsewhere, or who are living and working here now, be throughout the museum, which I think is important and exciting.
One thing that I'm excited about is we interviewed the person working on the plans for the Memphis College of Art, pulling together art and artists and just cataloging all that. And it was probably a year and a half ago now. And it is, and again, you're 4 weeks in, but it's just an amazing thing and a kind of a sad thing that the College of Art had such an influence on so many great artists. And I will meet people or interview them not knowing they went to the College of Art X years ago. And then, of course, it closed during COVID. And it was just a really unnecessarily but inglorious, kind of closing the museum. So I'm excited about that as well. And I think that is it'll be interesting to see where that intersects with what you do.
Yeah, I think that show will be really exciting and also really lovely, because I think a lot of people are going to use it, as you were saying, as almost a reunion and like a proper goodbye of sorts, because there were so many things that changed in that period of our lives where we didn't get to do things the way we would have hoped to. So
again, we're here with Adeze Wilford. She is the curator of African American art and art of the African Diaspora at the Brooks Art Museum. I'm Eric Barnes, and this is The Sidebar, which airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. It's focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. Not just a radio show, though. It's one of a number of podcasts we do every week at the Daily Memphian, including the Memphis Grizzlies podcast and our food podcast, Soundbites, which also airs here on WYXR every Thursday at 11. We also host the podcast version of Behind the Headlines, the TV show we produce with folks over at WKNO every week. All of our podcasts are on the Daily Memphian site, as well as iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get the WYXR shows. That's Sidebar and Soundbites at WYXR.org or on the WYXR app. It includes all the WYXR shows, the talk shows, the music shows, archives of all of them from all the various hosts and DJs that work or volunteer their time to make WYXR possible. If you're not a supporter of WYXR, it is nonprofit, listener-supported radio, so consider becoming a member. It's very important to what we do at WYXR. Or you can do a one-off donation. If you become a member, you get a bunch of benefits. It's all at WYXR.org or on the app. And if you're not a paid subscriber to the Daily Memphian, do consider becoming one. We are the largest newsroom in the region, focused, at 99.99% on Memphis and things outside Memphis that impact Memphis. We are a nonprofit, but we do charge subscriptions. If you're already a subscriber and consider a donation, we would also very much appreciate that. Coming up soon on the Sidebar in a couple of weeks is Russ Wigginton, the head of the National Civil Rights Museum, which will be great. I've never interviewed Russ, I don't think, but I've known Russ for years. He's an amazing guy. I've known him before he was at National Civil Rights Museum. But really looking forward to having Russ on the show. Recently on the Sidebar, some weeks ago, we had Todd Richardson of Crosstown talking about all kinds of things going on at Crosstown, as well as the new venue across the street, the Live Nation Ticketmaster venue that's going in. We also had Andy Cates, who is the chair of Memphis Fourth Estate, which is the owner-operator, nonprofit 501c3 of the Daily Memphian. He and I have been friends and have worked together for now 8 years, a lot of years, so many years, and most of them great, working on the Daily Memphian. I mentioned Behind the Headlines. We've got coming up in a few weeks, CJ Davis, the police director. Looking forward to having her on the show. We recently have had a bunch of really great shows, all of them booked by Natalie Van Gundy, who produces this and all of our podcasts and radio and Behind the Headlines. Mary Lee Harris, Judge Sugarman, the juvenile court judge, a couple of folks from city council, a couple of shows involving folks with county commission, especially focused on the school situation. So you can check all those out as podcasts or as video on YouTube or on Daily Memphian. Last bit of housekeeping. We have our first of the year business seminar coming up, Women in Business, on February 27th at 3:30 at the Botanic Garden. Tina Sullivan, who was until recently the head of the Overton Park Conservancy, she'll be there. Ursula Madden, who was obviously in local TV, worked with the mayor's office, is now at MLGW, will be there, as well as Lee Mansberg, who runs Junior Achievement. That's February 27th at 3:30 at the Botanic Garden. You do have to get tickets to it, so you just go to Eventbrite, search for Daily Memphian, or you go into the navigation of Daily Memphian and click on seminars, I believe it is. So that is coming up very soon. But we are here with Adeze Wilford. She's the curator of the African American art and art of the African Diaspora at the Brooks. 4 weeks in. I want to come back to some of the work you're doing, but what's Memphis been like so far?
It's been really great. I went to my first Grizzlies game a couple of weeks ago. It was the one against the Rockets.
Oh,
so it was a little, yeah. Well, we won.
Oh, we did win that one.
It was like
that was the one we won.
It was an exciting game.
Yes.
And it was really fun to be in the stadium and to hear the energy there.
Yeah. I'm a season ticket holder, huge fan, completely biased, have no objectivity about the Grizzlies. So.
Yeah, I'm not a big sports person, but I like seeing sports events live. And so I know how important the Grizzlies are to the city. So I thought it would be a good idea to go check them out.
It is. That's great. That's really good. Good food that you've had?
I went to Central Barbecue for the first time. My family had come to visit me last weekend, so we went there, had some ribs, and that was fun.
You gotta do that. You gotta do that.
But there are some places that I'm looking forward to checking out around town.
Yeah.
And there's been some really cute, like smaller coffee shops. I went to City and State recently.
Yeah.
Super, super cute.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. That's awesome. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in New York, but
Okay.
in Westchester County, so
Okay.
just outside of the city in a place called New Rochelle.
Yeah. I lived in New York a long time ago
Okay.
for about 5 years, and my daughter lives there in Brooklyn now.
Oh, nice.
So I'm
Yeah.
actually going up in a couple of weeks.
Okay, yeah. So my family, my mom's from the Bronx and my dad is from Harlem, and we moved to the suburbs. And then after coming back from school, decided that I wanted to live in the city.
Yeah.
And so I lived in Harlem for about 7 years before moving to Miami.
Yeah. It's great. I love going to New York, and every time I leave, I'm like, I'm really glad I'm leaving right now. It's the greatest city in the world. It's just amazing.
There's a
But I don't
specific
know.
energy.
Yeah, I didn't have it to keep up with it.
I think that it's a wonderful place to explore and find little pockets, and there are lots of things to do for everyone. And I'm kind of curious to see what the pockets in Memphis for me will look like. And
Yeah. There are. I mean, as somebody who's a transplant here, but almost 30 years. I mean, it's interesting, and even still, I mean, it just kind of evolves and changes.
Yeah.
And it's been an amazing place for me, and a place to raise kids and all that kind of stuff. What got you into art and art museums and all this?
So, my mom always had memberships to museums throughout the city. And that was kind of what we did on the weekends is we would go to the Museum of Natural History, and I would spend hours looking at the big blue whale and trying to figure out how they got the whale up in the ceiling. And, as time went on, I had more and more of an interest in art. And I started interning at museums in high school even, going down, like commuting on Metro North and spending time in the city and just really trying to understand what it meant to run a museum. So I've worked in a lot of different departments besides curatorial. Obviously, that's been my focus and my interest. I want to make exhibitions and I want to do shows and publications, and that's what's exciting to me. But I think it's really important, especially for people who are coming into the industry, to really understand what the other departments in a museum do so that you can be as collaborative as possible. So I did prep work at the MCA in Chicago. I was in the public programs department at Studio Museum for a little bit, trying to put together programs that responded to exhibitions. And it was a really wonderful learning experience, learning all of the ins and outs of what it takes to put all of the different components of what makes a museum special together.
I talk about this every time somebody on from art museums. I love art museums. I'm not a particularly learned person about art or art museums, but I love the experience of going to an art museum. Kevin at Dixon was nice enough to give me and Natalie Van Gundy a kind of ad hoc impromptu tour of both exhibits that were going on then. And one of my best friends is a guy who runs, Randy Suffolk, who runs the High Museum in Atlanta now.
Oh, nice.
We're older than you by quite a bit. But he did the same thing. I remember he took a job somewhere outside Philly, then he was upstate New York, and then I think he was somewhere else, and he was in Tulsa. And there's this sort of moving, it's one of those careers that for many people you move. Right? You see different things. And I've had this great pleasure of being in the museums he has run and getting this kind of tour from a friend of mine who's incredibly unassuming and not just a very unassuming thing to be a head of a museum in Atlanta, but he's just a very unassuming guy and go through other museums. And it is just, and walk around the back of his museums and see all the art and see, all that kind of stuff. And so it's fascinating to me and amazing, and I'm very excited about the Brooks and other museums that I go to. Coming back to some of the things you'll be working on, one, talk about, there'll be a dedicated space for African-American art in that collection at the museum, or how's that, is that worked out?
There's some things that I'm getting up to speed on, but I think that there isn't necessarily going to be this idea of separation where every single time that you come to the Brooks, this is the one place that you'll be able to find this type of artwork. Because I think that that's not really how people learn and experience now. I think that the idea of these siloed departments and galleries have kind of fallen out of favor because artists don't really work like that anymore either.
Right.
Most of the artists I know, no one really is only a painter or only a sculptor. They have all these different interests that they work through. And so to kind of confine them to one thing feels out of step. And so to confine the museum in that way also feels like it's a disservice.
I love that. Again, just as someone who loves art museums and knows very little about them, I love that because, sometimes there's a type of art that you like and you go into a particular big museum and it's a vast room of it. And it starts to kind of, again, this is an unlearned person, but who does like art, it kind of all starts to look the same. You start not seeing the distinction of it, just as a person walking around and kind of reading the cards. And then you're like, I think that's enough impressionist for me. You know what I mean? And then you go in the other room and it's like, it's all teapots or porcelain. I like the idea. And when I've been in exhibits, and one of the recent ones at Dixon, it's just on my mind because I was just there, was that way. It was everything. I mean, there was a Basquiat and there was a Matisse and there was modern and there was, and I love that.
I think the exciting part about this model is that you can have conversations with your collection. So if everything is in one space, you don't get to have intergenerational conversations.
Yeah.
You don't get to have a piece that is from the 19th century speaking to a piece that's from 2025. And so to have that flexibility makes it a really interesting and engaging experience for everyone.
And for what you're doing, it's African-American art, and the Diaspora I want to talk about, that's over centuries. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a period of time, right? It's not just American. It's the whole history.
World.
Yeah. Yeah. Define the African diaspora.
Yeah. So to me, that means very plainly what a diaspora is when people from one region in the world sprinkle themselves throughout the entire world and create homes and spaces and cultures within their new homes. And sometimes that happens through, choice, and people, like with Windrush, decided to go to London, or sometimes it's through force. And so that creates an entirely different conversation and context that people are making and creating within. Yeah. So it's exciting for me to be able to talk about and learn and discover new artists working throughout all different types of regions of the world.
Yeah.
I was really lucky in Miami and in New York that have really large Caribbean populations. A lot of the artists that I worked with were from the Caribbean and were responding to things that happened from a very specific post-colonial framework that's very different from how we experience it in the United States versus people who are in the UK or who are still working and living in the continent. So it's kind of all over the place, which is, I find that the most interesting shows can happen when you're thinking about many different things and can distill it into different themes.
I mentioned to the previous head of the National Civil Rights Museum, Terry Freeman, I'd gone to she was on this show, I think, and at that time had recently gone to the Museum of African American History in DC, the Smithsonian, which is a profound and really, it's an incredible experience. And I assume you've been there. Yeah. And part of and you talk about the diaspora and that kind of all these things, that museum kind of comes together that way in the sense that you come in the bottom in the worst of it, right? And that slavery and forced relocation doesn't capture it. And then you move up, and then it doesn't end, but then you get this whole story. It's not just about the horror. It'd be fine if it was, but for me personally, it was so great to kind of get up and say how all these things kind of work together, and the sadness and the greatness and the impact of African Americans. And
it's a fullness of human experience, and I think that that's really what I'm hoping to do, and what I hope I was able to do in other positions in the past is to give a full human experience. There's not any one way that we navigate the world, and there's not any one way that people make art in response to things that are happening. But I want there to be stories that capture, the real horrible things that have happened in this country and in this world. But I also want there to be stories that talk about the resilience that was a result of those things, or just mundane things like someone, putting on makeup in front of a mirror. Those are the things that also create a human being. And so they're worth talking about. They're worth discovering.
Yeah, this is a very shallow thing, but I was interviewed, I guess it was yesterday, about attitudes around, trends around positive and negative news. And one thing I said was, well, all news can't be positive and all news shouldn't be negative, because that's not how life works, right? We try not to dwell on the negative, but we're also not going to live in the panacea of, everything's fantastic in what we select for the 20 to 30 stories we do every day. And there's a very small in comparison to what you're talking about. But to reflect that is not to dwell in the past, it's to dwell in the negative. But a bad thing happened. We have to talk about that. You mentioned something earlier, maybe to that point, of programs that respond to the art. I think I know what you meant, but what did you mean when you said that?
Well, in that particular context, it was definitely in a role that I had as a person who was producing public programs for a museum, which is we would learn about what the exhibitions were, we would learn about what the themes were, who the artists were, ideas that they were excited about, and try and create programs that reflected that. So if we were doing a show that was about Afrofuturism, I would bring in a professor who just wrote a book that talked about a very specific idea like Drexia, and try and have a panel discussion that brought ideas that maybe you don't get to see on the wall text, which is only a couple hundred words, or you don't get to see on the label. Like sometimes, as curators, we try and put as much information as we can and to speak to the broadest public as possible. But sometimes people need more information or want to have more of an in-depth experience.
Yeah.
And so that's where like publications come in, or where these types of programs come in, so that you can offer just all these different entry points so that people can expand on ideas that you're thinking about.
Yeah. No, that's great. Last question I always try to ask people is, what was the first concert you went to?
Oh, my first concert was a James Brown concert at the BB King in New York City.
Wow.
So I was very small, and I'm not sure how my mom actually got me into the thing.
Yeah.
But I had on a very frilly church dress and the little toddler tiny heels and ruffle socks, and I was in heaven.
That's awesome. And first concert you remember that you paid, bought your own ticket?
I bought my own ticket. Growing up in New York, we were really lucky to have all these free concerts, and a lot of my friends were in bands, so I was doing that. But I think maybe the first concert that I remember paying for,
or going to free. I mean, I get what you're saying. It's easy.
There's always there's a summer series in Central Park, and they always have really great bands that come in, and the energy there where people would just wait for a long time, and it didn't matter if you were from the Upper East Side or if you're from Bushwick, everyone would kind of come together and see shows. I really love the energy of that, and I'm excited. There's so many festivals in Memphis.
So
I'm excited.
When the Shell gets started and all this, it is really good. There's a bunch of things. So.
Yeah.
Again, Adeze Wilford from the Brooks, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
That is all the time we have this week, though. If you missed any of the episode today, you can get it at the Daily Memphian, WYXR, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube. But thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.